Bookcase TV is brought to you in part by Digital Film Academy.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about darkness. And I don't mean darkness, the opposite of brightness, but darkness as the darkness of the soul. We're going to look at people like psycho killer, borderline, serial killers, or simply folks like you and I losing their sanity. But what's so interesting about darkness? What do people write about that? Is it a reflection of society, or is it for us another way to assess and access unsuspected aspects of ourselves we didn't know we have? So let's have a look at those rights here, because they represent today the best in dark psychological thrillers. All right, my next guest on the bookcase is John Land. Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you for having me, Frederic.
Is there like a safety looking into the past when the present is so uncertain?
William Faulkner said one of the greatest quotes ever. The past isn't dead, it's not even past. And one of the things I do in all my books is always have a keen awareness of how people became who they are and where things actually originated. That's the fun I have mostly in my Caitlin Strong series, where there's always a flashback subplot to her relatives who are also Texas Rangers and what they were doing and how it connects in the present. For instance, in the present tense. For instance, in Strong Rain Falling.
So but you're still in Texas, right?
They're set in Texas, but they're big action thrillers. Yeah. We go back to the very birth of the Mexican drug trade. Okay. How did it start?
Well, you're talking about the Mexican Revolution, right?
Pretty much, yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes.
So how did you get onto a topic? First of all, what was your interest there?
Well, my interest was the fact that since I'm doing a series about Texas Rangers, Caitlin Strong,
yeah.
You can't do the Texas Rangers without thinking about that border, without Mexico. And every book somehow gets into, or a couple of the books in the series had already gotten into the cartels. But prior to writing the book, I asked myself the question, when did it start? When did the drug business in Mexico start? And it was fascinating. It was so easy to find out. It was right there, but not what I expected. It was the Chinese immigrants coming over, obviously from China, and bringing opium in the late 19th century. Though that gave birth to an entire cottage industry of drug smuggling of opium.
Opium dens as well.
Yeah, exactly. The Mexicans became hooked on, became addicts just like the Chinese had before them. Chinese opium being smuggled through Baja, California is the birth of the Mexican drug trade industry into the United States. And that historical fact is related directly to what Caitlin is involved in the present.
So when we talk about trade, are we talking smuggling or just growing and smuggling?
Well, it is mostly the smuggling that the Texas Rangers are concerned about, the smuggling routes that blossom through South Texas that were sprouting out and starting to really affect the country.
I'm sure you follow the news and see all this crime going on at the Mexican borders.
Yes.
Did you visit those places for the book?
No, actually, to be very honest, I've never been to that border.
Okay.
It's not hard. You don't need to go to the border to get plenty of information about it.
But sometimes to get a feel of a place is different than...
It's a great point because it's hard to get all the details, but you can't go everywhere in a book.
Not.
And the fact is, a lot of these places are very dangerous to go. And I don't have as big a sense of adventure as I used to when I was younger. And it's research. If you're a good researcher, it seems like a sad excuse. And also, when I start a book, I don't know where it's going to take place. So most people...
you don't outline then?
No, I do not outline. I have a general concept of where I'm going.
Okay.
But, I might say, ooh, this is a cool place to set a scene. I'm going to go there. I've got to get Caitlin somewhere else. Let's get her out of Texas for a while because I don't want the series to start feeling claustrophobic.
So what's your personal interest to spend a year or two of your life writing about the drug trade in Mexico and... It must tie somewhere.
Well, the interest, it's actually reversed. I really don't have any interest per se in the drug trade. What I have is a great interest in the Texas Rangers.
Okay.
And Caitlin Strong, the female.
The
idea is we need to find a new, each book needs a new villain.
But I hear from the rumors that you're doing very well as well with Trust Your Eyes, because there was a Hollywood bidding war on it.
Yeah, Trust Your Eyes, which it actually came out in paperback last week. We had when it came out in September, we had a bidding war for it between Universal and Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers got it. And you know,
you mean we're talking about the rights for the film?
That's right.
Okay.
They optioned it.
Okay, they optioned it.
And they've assigned a director, the screenplay. The first draft of the screenplay is done. So I mean, there are 1,000 ways for it to go wrong and never happen. But at least at the moment, it's going the right way. So we'll see what happens.
What do you think is the appeal of that book that make it so hot for Hollywood?
I think that
the actions, visual, is the schizophrenic aspect of the character, which was like Hollywood feels like.
Yeah, I think that of all the books that I have done, I think it's the one that is the most suited for a movie in many ways. Okay. It's a very cinematic thing, and it has what my agent would call a kind of high concept of that, about a guy who spends every waking moment on Google Street View and sees something in a window that appears to be a murder that was captured in an instant as the Street View car went by. I think that notion, that kind of concept, coupled with the nature of the character who sees the image, really attracted Hollywood.
Are you playing with the reality and fiction? What we perceive is not quite real, or given the fact he's not quite, he's an ill man.
Thomas suffers from schizophrenia. He does have some sort of autistic tendencies. He has this addiction to this particular website, and Thomas is the kind of person who may read into more of what he sees than the rest of us would. But there's no questioning that the thing that he sees on the net is there, and it's whether his interpretation of it is correct. I mean, imagine if you committed a murder, and every single person on the planet with an internet connection is a potential witness if they only know where to look. I think all those elements are what attracted Hollywood to it.
So it's not like Blow Up, where the hero keeps blowing up his picture to make sure there's a crime, but there's nothing there at the end.
You know, it's the nature of this character, Thomas, that he feels he needs to know what's happened there, because he has some own very personal issues of something that happened to him when he was a kid that really have an impact on his whole worldview, and I think that he feels that if something bad happened to this person in that window, that's a way of correcting something bad that happened to him that someone could have seen and didn't. So it's that kind of extra layer involved in it.
What's your relationship with the past? You feel like you are always delving like a ethnographer, or what they call anthropologist?
Well, I do think that a lot of my books look at sort of family history and things that have happened to us in the past, things that shape us. And I suppose a lot of that, I think what happens to us personally for all writers, starts to come through in their writing. And
Absolutely.
We're all sort of prisoners of our past, and who we are is determined by these things that happened when we were very young, I think. So that's a theme that I think sometimes does come up.
How do you write? You outline, or you do like I found out more and more writers I come across, they just like they write on the fly.
I can't write on the fly. I can't. I do a kind of a mix.
Right.
Before I can start, I have to have what I call a hook. I need a way into the story. I need an interesting situation.
Not a theme, but situation.
No, situation. I need an interesting situation that kind of grabs the reader by the neck, and says, to get you in. And then when I have a pretty good idea of what the overall story is, I'll start writing. But I'm not able to. I know some authors plan out every chapter. They know what each chapter. I can't do that.
Why prompted you? Because you're a psychiatrist, yes, a forensic psychiatrist, I believe.
A forensic psychiatrist.
You can tell me the difference between a forensic and a regular psychiatrist. But before, your first book were about psychology, correct? The psychiatry as well.
Well, I've written 5 nonfiction books over the years, which have all been for lay audiences. This is my first fiction book, and what I did was basically cull all my experiences from life and from what I know of psychiatry and what I fantasize about crime and evil and good and conflict, and put it in a book.
I like the choice of word fantasize, not even a reflection, but a fantasize.
Well, you fantasize.
We can look into that word, sir.
Simultaneously.
So let's talk about Mad Dog House.
Mad
So
Dog
what's the
House.
story about?
It's about a surgeon named Roddy Dolan, who's in his mid-40s, who had a very checkered past and background, came from a very tough section of Brooklyn.
Where you from?
Where I'm from and where I came from. He's living in a suburb very comfortably. His best friend, Danny Burns, was also from the same neighborhood. They're comfortably ensconced in a upper middle class life. And lo and behold, one evening for a so-called consultation, in walks one Kenny Egan, who's also from the old neighborhood, who they haven't seen, who Roddy hasn't seen in 28 years. And that's when the proverbial you-know-what hits the fan. The crux of the story is what will Danny, and especially Roddy, with his checkered past as a mad dog. He was a boxer in the Golden Gloves as a kid. What will he and they do to get out of a terrible fix that they find themselves?
So what's the theme? It's a theme of redemption, making peace with the past?
There's redemption, and the overriding theme is, do we ever outgrow our pasts and DNA, our nurture? Can someone come like a wonderful wife and transform your life and thereby transform you into a good person? Or in times of stress and trouble, will we all revert to the primal need to prevail?
Yeah.
People always want to know, can I change? That's why people come to psychiatrists. They want to change something in their lives, either the way they react to people or behave in general, or they want to change the way their professional lives are going or whatever. And the question is, people find the process of psychotherapy and psychology very frustrating because it's very difficult to change. And then they ask, well, maybe I was just born this way and I can't be, you know, if you watch Tony Soprano is always, he's always arguing with Dr. Melfi, this is the way I am, I can't be different. She says, you can be different, you can learn to be different.
The crux in is it's a narrative. For me, it's always a problem of narrative. We live by stories.
We live by stories.
And then there's loops of stories, and you know that better than I do.
They never end. They go on, you know, Freud termed something the repetition compulsion.
That's right.
We all repeat the same patterns of behavior or the same story again and again and again. For those who've watched Tony Soprano and who are watching the reruns now, especially since his death, and I'm watching them the second time because they have more meaning to me now.
It always does after that.
He was a very, he loved the vulnerable and the innocent, the ducks and the horse that died and helpless people. So compassion, I think you have to have compassion to be a good novelist. You have to enter into other people's beings and be them. And
you have to love them for what they are.
You have to love them, know them, and depict them.
No Way Back, which came out in April, you said, right? Mm-hmm. And paperback, a good picture of Andrew in the following 15 seconds.
We've established that it's my book.
That's right, this is your book. So is this a series of the same author or the standalone?
Standalone. I write thrillers about people who are successful and sort of likable suburban moms and dads who you know, who sort of step into the wrong place, either through fault of their own or mistake or through circumstances, and then their life doesn't quite end up the same way.
Is that pretty much about your life as well?
Mine's a little more mundane than that. You know? Then I was sort of an English jock in college, but after that I got an MBA. 20 years went by. I never thought about this again. Wrote the book, and it had some attention with publishers, but it didn't make the cut. And I got a call out of the blue, and someone says, "Can you take a call from James Patterson?"
The James Patterson.
The James Patterson. He was looking, unbeknownst to me, to partner up with someone, and it led to a career. I learned how to adapt the things that Jim did well in his books into my own style in terms of creating suspense, in terms of turning pages, in terms of creating characters that you will invest your reader in. So that's sort of my brand now.
So let's talk about the new book, What's the nutshell, what's the story about?
It's about a housewife, a successful, an affluent housewife, but attractive, happily married, who has a bitter fight with her husband. But, a fight that would have ended the next morning. But he goes off, she goes into the city to do something, and she's meeting a friend at a bar just to vent. And the friend doesn't come, she doesn't show up. and the gal has a margarita, maybe she has a second margarita, she's really literally going to look to get back on the train, and she sort of comes into the spell of a very handsome, attractive, alluring stranger who is really a nice guy, and they have sort of an interesting conversation. There's a little chemistry. The guy gets up and goes to the piano and plays like, Rachmaninoff or something, and she falls under his spell, and she ends up, in her mistake, following her to his room, and then bad stuff happens when she gets up there. There's a murder created. A gun falls in her lap. She has to shoot someone just to save her own life, and that person that she shoots, when she goes to look at who it is and takes out his wallet, is a Homeland Security agent. So now she's murdered a Homeland Security agent. And her life, and she has to go on the run. And basically, everything falls apart for her.
You work on TV as well, or film?
Well, actually, this was sold, I won't say who, but it was sold in Hollywood to a really well-known producer. Yeah.
Option.
And already in work, writer and team in work on it. So it could be a television series. I'm hopeful it will be.
So what's next after?
Another book called Everything to Lose, a similar theme of
15 seconds.
Just the theme of someone whose life takes a different direction in about 15 seconds through a slip of their own.
Is it like a self-destructive stance or choices, poor judgments?
Choices, poor judgments and choices, because we all make them. So when you sort of make those choices and let something in, you never know where life takes you. And we all know how life, I've had examples in my life, on a deeper level, how quickly it can change. How quickly you can go from feeling ecstatic to feeling miserable, from feeling, repentant to feeling joy. I like writing about regular people who have to measure up and see if they're capable of acting heroically.
Well, hopefully people can live by proxy through your books. And Andrew Gross, No Way Back.
Thanks for having me here.
Thank you.
Okay.
And my next guest, T. Jefferson Parker. His new book came out in April, correct?
April, yes.
The beautiful title, The Famous and the Dead.
Mm-hmm.
So you studied as a journalist, correct?
Yeah.
And where was the moment where there was a crossover, when you felt like writing short pieces, you had to go for long pieces?
Yeah.
There must have been a time in your life when you felt like journalism was not enough, or it was not satisfying enough?
That's very, very true. Yeah, it wasn't so much a moment. It was I went into journalism knowing that I didn't want to stay very long. I was an English major in college, and after college, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a fiction writer, but I wanted to get a job on a newspaper.
That's a very brave career.
So I could write, but I needed a job, of course, as we all do. So I got the job on the newspaper, hoping that I would be able to learn a little bit about the world and how it works, which you do as a journalist. It's great training. It's better than any MBA, I think, or MFA. And so that's what I did. And during the day, I would work for these little newspapers, weekly newspapers at first, and cover the little town that I was assigned to. And then at 5 o'clock, when I was off duty, I'd go home with my typewriter and typing paper, and I'd work at night, evenings and weekends and nights. So I was a journalist and a creative writer at the same time.
So let's talk about the underbelly of Los Angeles, the Southern California you talk about. What's interesting to you about that?
I'll tell you, easily for me, what's most interesting about it for the past 6 years has been the influence of Mexican drug cartel wars on America.
Okay.
Along the border on both sides.
Yeah, which is this book deals with.
He's right dead in the middle of that. He's assigned to an ATF task force, and their job is to intercept guns going from the United States to Mexico illegally. And that brew of guns, cash, drugs, people coming north, guns and cash going south, that iron river of guns and money, I think is fascinating. I travel to Mexico a fair amount. I love to fish. I go down there fishing every year.
Spanish?
No, I don't. I'm learning, so I know a little. And I go down there as a tourist to goof off. I go down to do research. I both admire and love that country, and I fear it at the same time. And I think that comes out in my book.
And the fear comes from where?
Well, just how utterly lawless it is in places down there right now, and has become.
Are you a pantser or a plotter?
A pantser or a plotter?
Yeah, a plotter.
I do both. Yeah, I'm a little more.
You're
of
the
a
first
pantser.
one. Huh? You're the first one who say that. We've met all those writers. It's either one or the other, but you do both. Okay.
I do both. I really
think if
do
you have
both.
a box of ideas, I call that. You know, I watched a documentary on Woody Allen, and people say, well, how do you manage to do a film a year? He says he has no problem because he's like everyone else. He's got tons of ideas and he writes them down, he put in a drawer, and when he needs something, he goes through it and then he finds a story, you know? Because not a story are worth writing about. But it sounds like you're doing that as well.
I totally, yeah, that's the way I work.
So you do both. You do a little bit of outline, and you fly on the silver pens. Basically.
Yeah, both. You know, I think you have to do both. It really, it's nice. You have to have some general idea where you're going with the story. You don't necessarily have to know how you're going to get there, but you need to have some kind of a goal or an overview, and that can change.
You've used a lot of the fear of lawlessness. Yeah, is that writing for you a way to recreate order?
To create order? I don't think so. No? I feel personally, I feel grounded and safe and sane. Okay. You know, I don't fear for my sanity yet. What's interesting to me about lawlessness is I think that you see some large percentage of human nature revealed under lawlessness that you don't see under control. You know, that's why Heart of Darkness is a great novel, and that's why I wanted to set mine in the lawless. My Congo is Mexico. You know, same thing.
Do you feel like a state of dystopia bring the best in people, especially if it's completely anarchic around you? Is that the best way to touch your soul?
Yeah, like I would agree to that. Or I think so.
Yeah, soldiers go to war. They say that they find the brotherhood that they will never find in real life.
Yeah, well
just
said.
Because of that.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure people would love it. The Famous and the Dead. So. T. Jefferson Parker. Thank you for being with us on Bookcase TV. And,
well, thank you, Frederic.
And the title of the next novel can be revealed, or is it still
is called
in
Full
incubation?
Measure. Full Measure from Abraham Lincoln.
All right. Well,
last full measure of devotion.
Wish you all the best for that.
Thank you.
Okay. I thought to conclude our last pick of the week of the season, we will go back full circle and review interesting novels that we've been missing. And the first one is Jacob's Oath by Martin Fletcher. What is the oath? It's central to the dilemma that Jacob is living. He has promised his brother that he will kill the German Nazi that killed him, and he goes through life consumed by this rage and a promise of to achieve this goal. But along the way, obviously, life is never linear. He falls in love with also an Holocaust survivor who teaches him love, and he becomes torn between whether he should follow his heart or whether he should obey his oath he made to his brother. And that here's the dilemma that Jacob has to live with and decide. So if you want to know the outcome, you have to read the novel, Jacob's Oath by Martin Fletcher. Which takes me to our next book. It's called the Maid version. It's by Daniel Woodrell, who wrote also The Winter's Bone. He's a writer of the Ozark Mountain. Winter's Bones was based in the Ozark Mountain, and this book, well, guess what? It's also based in the Ozark Mountain. It's a story of a maid whose sister died in a dance floor explosion and is consumed by her version of the facts, what happened, who started the fire. She tried to confide to her grandson, doesn't listen. She thinks probably she's completely delusional, and that here is a central dilemma of the story. So does she manage to convince people? Does she manage to being heard by other people outside of her grandson? You have to read the novel. It's very well written, very flowery language, more like in the Faulkner style, but engaging nonetheless. The Maid's version by Daniel Woodrell. It takes me to my next book, very similar as well in fiction, a bit more pared down in the sort of narrative because Woodrell is a bit flowery, but this one is more minimalist, I suppose. It's Andrew Dubus III, Dirty Love. You may know him from The House of Sand of Fog. It also became a film. And this is sort of a novel which I like. It's 4 stories, they intertwine, and they always talk about the kind of character which are just like stultifying. I suppose that's the best way I can find to describe them, where the characters default towards sex and love and alcohol to cope with their existential void and are unable to get a grasp on themselves. They are sort of bottomless and they are drifters and they have an inability to get a grip on their life. André Dubus III, I'm sure he will hate for me to say that, but he's related to Henry Dubus I. and Dirty Love, beautiful novel. Which takes me to Javier Marias, Spanish author about 15 novels, I believe. It's called The Infatuation. I love this book because it's a reflection on metaphysics of love and death. And the book started very, very innocently. It's written as a mystery novel with a woman called Maria who goes to the same cafe every morning to have breakfast. There she meets a couple who also go there every morning to have breakfast, and they strike a friendship, and until the husband is stabbed to death in the street. Through this she becomes a friend to the widow, and through the widow she meets another man who has a lot of things to say about the murder, but she falls in love with him. So the book becomes at this point, as I say, a reflection on the metaphysics of love and death, and what it means to be alive in a world that feels pretty empty. Beautiful existential novel, The Infatuation by Javier Marias. And this concludes our very last pick of the week of the season, and thank you for being with us all the way through.